Result of an almost 30-year-long acquaintance that dates back to the king's exile to Normandy. Eustace's courtage was safeguarded by a famous fencer, Wilburg of Normandy. Many believed he was Edward's out-of-wedlock son. The gossip burgeoned, chiefly due to the king's habit of booking the kirk for his repentful prostration. Thus, in the corridors, Edward was criticized for spending most of his time in church, not in the royal bedroom, favoring prayer over dalliance. It was Count de Boulogne whose name was made with debauchery, and his manifestation was nothing short of a bad omen for British people. Eustace II and Wilburg demanded a judgment on the assailants, with retribution in mind. Edward the Confessor's decision was hasty, and he demanded chastisement. Demand was the only thing he could do. After all, the punishment on the subject can only be followed by their liege. And in this case, that happened to be me. I refused to reciprocate, telling the king that they were in their rights to defend their families against Eustace's pitiful behavior. Of course, in my speech, I omitted the information that the attack was executed on my command. With his decision undermined, Edward's only choice was to face his strongest lord. That is me, Godwin of Kent. To do so, he had to gather many more forces than he already had. The bastard was successful. Siward and Leofric will be able to assist the king in the upcoming war. In Laud, Wilburg was greeted in the royal courtyards, only to be relegated to another errand. Someone had to round Edward's keepings to recruit rookies for his new army. A small squad led by Wilburg was selected to avoid attention, but Wilburg's fame made this news hard to contain. Eventually, his mission was made known to me, and I knew exactly what I had to do to make his life harder. Edward the Confessor was in awe. As a token of his gratitude, he gave Wilburg his own sword. Bastard's cheeks were shaking with joy like a little boy's jowls. I think in this act, Wilburg saw something paternal. He was ready to move mountains for the king, and soon Edward's army was ready. If it wasn't for one very small detail. Supplies from the royal armory were delayed, and without the right weapons, Edward had a ghost of a chance in defeating me. Someone must have made it to Peterborough to hustle the smiths. Someone trusted by the king, and foolish enough to be at the king's beck and call. Wilburg of Normandy hit the road again. It was my cue to move. When Wilburg was busy fixing the armory, Edward was left unprepared, ill-equipped, and without his best guard. That was my best chance to strike against the king, and our forces were to meet by Gloucester. I was sure Wilburg couldn't make it, even if he tried hasting his forces with a whip. We were about to enter the battlefield, and Wilburg of Normandy was nowhere to be seen. Victory was mine. I was wrong. The bastard had more in him than I ever anticipated. He swept through the battlefield like a thunder. A messiah Edward was praying for. The battle was lost. I underestimated Wilburg, never considering him a worthy opponent. After all, you can't reason with emotions. Yet, ironically, that affection led to Wilburg's demise. Believing he was saving his father, the bastard took an arrow with Edward's name on it. However, the king was already victorious, and Wilburg never became either a martyr or a hero. Not even a son. Just another casualty. And history has no gentle way in dealing with the beaten. But I did not intend to stay defeated. I had to make sure that the name of Godwin of Kent will be remembered and down in history books as the one who set Britain on fire.
Edward the Confessor met his end on a cold night of the 5th of January 1066, bequeathing the country to no heir. The only apparent scion to the throne was Edgar, a 15-year-old son of Edward the Exile. Unfortunately, due to Edward the Confessor's inability to secure young Edgar's heritage, a prospect of peaceful hereditary succession receded. As a result, a claim to Britain's throne was demanded by 3 ambitious champions. A cunning nobleman, Harold Godwinson, that secured his position as the most powerful man in England after succeeding his father as the Earl of Wessex. William the Bastard, who has been allegedly offered a kingship by Harold Godwinson shortly before Edward the Confessor's death. And lastly, the King of Norway himself, Harald Hardrada, who is considered the last great Viking. However, the Witenagemot, a ruling class of royal councillors, considered Edgar too inexperienced to be an effective leader in the course of inevitable succession war, and decided to crown Harold Godwinson as the next King of England. As a result, Tostig, an exiled brother of King Harold Godwinson, persuaded the King of Norway to invade Britain. Shortly before that, Harold tried dissuading him from sailing, but when Tostig asked what the new king had in return for the Norwegian monarch, he just snorted. 7 feet of English ground, or as much more as he may be taller than other men. Early in September, Harald Hardrada took over 300 Drakkar ships in the direction of East Britain heading for York. The first demonstration of resistance was met at the outskirts of the town of Fulford, led by brothers Edwin and Morcar. Morcar was not ready to face Harold's army ferociously ravaging the Mercian coast. Tostig knew the terrain, foisting the defenders to an unfavorable position. Anglo-Saxon troops couldn't hold the ground for long enough, and soon, the Battle of Fulford turned into a bloodshed. On the 20th of September, Edwin and Morcar were forced to cut back, and with their army shattered, left York unprotected. I mark the day of the Fulford shambles black. By mere miracle I returned to York, only to be downcast by the cries of widows of my fallen brethren. But there was no time to yell bloody murder, as the Viking army was getting closer to our home each breath. We, who survived, had no other choice but to pluck up courage and stand our ground. Withal, we're far from being an army, hardly a bunch of outworn bruisers who lucked out on death. But without us, York will burn. Our efforts turned out to be nothing more but a stopgap, an endeavor not worth the effort. In the end, our patricians made a deal with Tostig. York will be spared from the Vikings' rage in exchange for supplies. But the word is, King Harold II got wind of the defeat in Fulford. He mobilized his best forces in short order and set his course on Yorkshire with the promise of reclaiming the city from the invaders. We decided to keep up our guard and fight, and becoming as vexatious as foxes, gnawing the little supplies our enemies had and fretting the back line of Harold's forces. If luck permits, we'll still be given a chance to fight under our king's banner. We fought each night like it was the last. We caught unsuspecting scout groups off guard and intercepted the supply wagons. But this night, the Vikings doubled their defenses. Suddenly, we heard the rattling of horse blinding and clinging of dropped keel. Forthwith, we saw knights bearing the colours of House Godwinson. Turned out, King Harold and his men reached Yorkshire in less than 4 days. His non-pariah riders swept through the country like northern wind. Their destination? Stamford, only a few miles short from York, where unsuspecting Harald Hardrada set up his camp and where the fate of York will be determined. Tostig is dead. Decapitated by his own brother, King Harold II. Harold Hardrada, the last great Viking, met his end on the 25th of September, 1066. His battle cry was interrupted with the tip of my arrow that got stuck in his neck like a cheap circus trick. With no leadership, the Viking party scrambled and retreated to Rakol, where a treaty was signed. In the end, only 24 of 300 Drakars that reached British soil returned to their homeland. The celebration was grandeur, but the war was far from over. Only 3 days after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the spies reported of William the Bastard's forces reaching the city of Hastings. The king decided to carry a surprise attack to catch the invaders with their defenses down. Little we knew, William brought in his own spies to London that notified the Bastard of every move we made. Harold II Godwinson led us believe that he was anointed to lead our people. Maybe it was far-fetched lie or blind belief he himself envisioned. Truth is, we followed him to the bitter end. A king was sent to the gates of heaven by an arrow to his eye, and his body trampled by the hooves of cavalry to the metallic jarring of his armor. To much surprise, William and his army did not attack London straightforward. He decided to cut the capital from its supplies, patiently awaiting capitulation. After taking over the capital, the Witenagemot submitted the crown to the Bastard shortly after William seized Winchester, where the royal treasure was. On the 25th of December 1066, William was no longer a bastard, for this day was marked as the day William the Conqueror was born. A new title fit for a new king, but if you ask me, now he sounds plain posh. And me? Well, I must be the luckiest bitch's son that ever walked the islands. One of Bastard's muscles sliced my eye with an axe, rendering me haggard for the rest of the battle. Never saw the fall of King Harold II, and after all, I think that's for the best, as I never met a child fond of inglorious songs of fall and disappointment. Never became an old grouch either. In the long run, a lazy eye is a small price to pay for a title of Earl of Locksley.